within solidarity economy movements worldwide, which you'll hear a little bit more from Ethan about, and within spaces where people are brainstorming and talking about solidarity economy, are being explored all these different ways to network together all these practices. It's not an easy question. I mean, how do you? It's a huge diversity of different institutions, and we don't always have a lot of time and a lot of resources. But I think in some sense, because we don't have a lot of extra time, extra resources, and because our projects might be struggling against time and with money, all the more reason to be really creative and figure out what are all the different ways that we can mutually reinforce the other projects. What are all the different ways we can not only each of us spend all of our day, as much of our day, participating in these different types of projects, but also in each project, each organization, how can it think about all of its operations in a way that reinforces and strengthens the material basis of all of the different practices that share these values. So what we'll talk more about in the afternoon are kind of a number of different dimensions for networking and organizing, including, of course, sharing skills and knowledge and ideas, creating spaces and enlarging spaces, even within all different types of educational institutions, for talking about these ideas, researching possibilities, creating solidarity in markets, so kind of supply chain connections. As Equal Exchange is a really good example of, where they're linking producer cooperatives, worker cooperatives, and consumer cooperatives on all different levels from the beginning to the end of their supply chain. How can all cooperatives and enterprises driven by values of equity and justice be linking to each other in their supply chains, and in that way supporting and building the whole movement? So that was that we're running short on time.
That was your 2 minutes.
2 minutes. So also, financing. What are different ways to pool our resources to improve our ability to finance ourselves and our projects collectively? How can we, the question, why organize? Not only to create all these material connections, but also to strategize about the type of policy change or governance changes that really could help move our projects forward. And I mean, the final thing that that we'll talk about and that we think is important in solidarity economy, and is thinking about how can social movements, that are fighting for equal rights, for justice in all different dimensions, struggling against capitalist systems, how can they be working together with these different types of economic projects? So not always having a separation between alternatives and political struggles. More later.
I was raised as a Catholic, and every time I had impure thoughts, I had to go and confess them. Glad to be among a group of people that are happily and freely sharing our impurities. My session is going to be on market socialism, and that might strike some of you itself as an impurity. That's capitalism. Socialism has nothing to do with markets. I want to explore the possibility we can challenge that maybe there can be markets that are social markets, and in particular, start with a quick look at what are some of the values that got articulated in the socialist movement, in a way as a reaction against capitalism. But what capitalism denies to us: equality, democracy, not just political democracy, but social and economic democracy, and the free development of each individual to their highest potential. What do we need to achieve that? Look very quickly at the traditional models of state socialism and why those failed in many ways. I think we have to come to terms with that, in part because that's what we have to deal with when we encounter ordinary working people in America for whom that's their image of socialism.
Right.
And you may not want to use the word socialism, but you want to get back to what it was that people were striving to overcome when they were trying to get beyond capitalism. So we'll look at some of those problems. Then we'll look at capitalism very briefly again, just to take note of what it is about capitalism, its social structures, its ways of organizing ownership, its ways of accumulating wealth in order to invest for innovation and transformation, the way that our activities get coordinated in capitalism, partly by means of markets, partly by means of state structures. And an important question, how are the people who do the work of managing held accountable? And to whom are they accountable? And then we'll take these sort of dimensions of capitalism and try to imagine how they might be otherwise. And I'll quickly just put out a menu of a couple of models of socialist alternatives, one of which is often called economic democracy, where the ownership, rather than being private or state, is social. How wealth is accumulated for social purposes in a way that's different from capitalism. What's done that changes the way markets work in capitalism and how it might be in a system of economic democracy. And to look, and this is where the cooperative part comes in, to look at worker-owned enterprises. And one important example of those in the Basque region of Spain, a city called Mondragon, where workers own a vast network of worker-run cooperatives. We'll look at that model and talk at some length about what it means to do things cooperatively as opposed to in a capitalist way in the production process. And then there's another model I want to just look at briefly, which has to do with a different way of thinking about making the ownership of wealth more equal than it is in capitalism, what the implications of that might be. And again, what would happen with various kinds of markets that would be different from the way that they're done in capitalism. And an important concrete example in the United States that somewhat exemplifies this other model is the Alaska Permanent Fund, where the wealth from the oil pipeline was appropriated by the state of Alaska, and every citizen of Alaska, whether they work or not, they get a check every year for a couple of $1,000s just for being a human being. It's social wealth, it's passed on from generation to generation, and there are lots of problems with it, of course, but it is the seed of a kind of model that can be generalized. We can talk about that. So that's basically some of the things we'll be doing in my session. I'll try to just lay it out very quickly, not say too much more than I've said now, and open it up for us to explore these ideas together.
Right. Sweden?
What about Sweden?
Are you going to tell us about Sweden?
I can talk about Sweden if you want to talk about Sweden. I know a little bit about it. Not very. Okay, so I think I've run my time, so I'll cede it to
Hi, my name is Jason Reed, and thanks once again for being invited to be here. Okay, so what I want to talk about in my time now and in my time in the session are three sort of interconnected words and concepts that people other than me, lots of people are using to talk about alternatives to capitalism. These are the commons, the common, and communization. Connections but also distinctions. In the first instance, people talk about the commons as a historical story. That before there was capitalism, especially in England, there was a practice by which people commonly held land and used this to graze their sheep on and gathered firewood, and this had to be destroyed and closed in order for capitalism to come into existence, because one of the things that capitalism requires is that people have to sell their wage in order to survive. There are no other ways to sustain their basic life process. And this is a story that's important to tell because it reminds us, first and foremost, and I think this is important, that capitalism is not human nature. It had to be imposed, it had to be violently imposed on people. But this is a story mainly about the past. It also reminds us, this is one of the things I want to talk about, the relationship between commons and enclosures. The way in which every time a common is created, it's also seen as a way to enclose and make money off of it. But that's about kind of the past. In the present, people mainly talk about the commons, or common, in two significant ways. One is, this is one way of talking about the earth, the environment, nature, as something that is common. It's something that connects us all, whether we like it or not. It's something we all have to contend with there's no way for any of us, no matter how wealthy we are, to remove ourselves from the effects of what's happening to nature. So it's a common condition, an externality in a negative sense, which goes beyond what can be privately held. Because it doesn't matter if you own your land and you throw chemicals in it, it's going to have effects on the common land of everyone. The second way people talk about commons, which is just distinct from this, and people generally use the word the common, is a way of talking about things like knowledge, language, culture, all these things which are also not privately held or even held by any state or institution, but necessarily circulate in order to be worth anything to anyone. A language that one person spoke wouldn't be a language at all. Certain types of knowledge only one person had wouldn't be worthwhile at all. They need to circulate in order to have any value or meaning whatsoever, and they need to circulate in a way that often goes beyond what can either be privately held or even collectively held. And these two things have one thing in common, and that is, pun intended, and that is, in both cases, they call into question certain ideas about exclusive ownership that are part of traditional private property. But they have also very big differences between the two of them, as I try to point out in the readings of other things I hand out. That the first commons, the earth, is under a kind of scarcity. The interesting thing about the second common, and people talk about this in terms of things like the digital common and other things, is it suggests the possibility of moving beyond scarcity, in the sense that one of the things that provoked a lot of interest in this discussion of the common is that now, through technological conditions primarily, we're living in an age in which it becomes increasingly possible for us to circulate things like information, knowledge, without having to pay for the ability to circulate those things. We all do this all the time in all sorts of ways. We're conscious of it. In part, it's the unconscious dimension that I'm kind of interested in. Brings me to the last term that I want to talk about, which is a term has a long history, but it's emerged recently, in my view at least, the way I encountered it, in some of the movements around education in California, in the UK, in Puerto Rico, and other places, this term communization. And basically what people mean when they say communization, they mean, like everyone's been talking about, and I think rightfully so, not so much waiting for the revolution to happen and impose some new model, but to begin practices by which one, first of all, becomes aware of things that are commonly held and then tries to break those commonly held things from any attempt to appropriate them or reduce them to private property. So communization is both a way of thinking and a way of practicing that tries to render more and more things common and connect these commons to each other. So that's what I want to talk about in my